One of the newest additions to Hamilton, Missouri is actually the Missouri Quilt Museum. And while you're out here, be sure to check out the world's largest spool of thread. One of the newest additions to Hamilton, Missouri is the Missouri Quilt Museum. And let me tell you, as a traveling quilter, the traveling quilter, I really do enjoy going out and visiting the different quilt museums that are all over the country. But by far, the Missouri Quilt Museum is hands down my favorite. Located at 300 East Bird Street, the Missouri Quilt Museum is 30,000 square feet of what used to be the schoolhouse. This 100-plus-year-old building actually takes up an entire city block. That's a lot of learning about quilts. The best place to start when you enter into the Missouri Quilt Museum is actually down in the basement. Downstairs, you're going to find not only a spectacular collection of antique sewing machines, but you're also going to walk into what used to be the school's gymnasium. You can still find the bleachers down there. But also, there was an amazing collection of quilts that was on loan from the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. '74. I was not alive yet in 1974. I came around just a couple years later. But one thing that I do know about the 1970s was how popular was polyester. Oh my gosh. Apparently, polyester was actually used in quilt making as well. I was lucky enough to look up close and personal at the Celebrity Signatures quilt. With 51 genuine celebrity signatures, this quilt was handmade for the California Palo Verde's Junior Women's Club annual fundraiser. Say that 10 times fast. This quilt has actual hand signatures from celebrities like Barbra Streisand, Dick Van Dyke, Bob Hope, Carol Burnett, Dean Martin, and many, many more. Also included are some pretty famous athletes of the time, like Hank Aaron. When I first got to the Quilt Museum and I walked in the front door, I was actually greeted by a young man named Jackson. As it turns out, Jackson is the son of the owners and directors of the Quilt Museum. And I was so impressed by Mr. Jackson because I quilt and talk about quilting for a living, but this young man knew more about quilting than I did. When we got to the main floor and was walking around looking in the different collections, we came across the 1891 quilt. It's just known as the 1891 Crazy Quilt, and Mr. Jackson was more than willing to help tell the story of this amazing quilt.
The person who made this wanted it to be family, so like all the fabric in this is from old clothing and old ribbons, and there's the wedding ring, anchor because one of the relatives was in the Navy, so it has a lot of history in this quilt. She made this quilt and gave it to her granddaughter for Christmas. And she gave it to her son, and her son won lots of motorcycle racing trophies. And he actually took all of those trophies and he put them in the middle, he bunched it up and he shoved it underneath his bed. And he did it on accident, but he actually preserved the quilt, so it helped really well today. But the back of it was really bad and rotted away. So they took his old clothes, because they found it underneath his bed after he died, And they took his old suits and they made the backing out of it.
I just have to say, for the record, I love miniature quilts. I am in awe of miniature quilts. However, I really don't think that my fingers can actually work with fabric that small. Wow.
Did you know that the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky has a collection of miniature quilts? But I bet you also didn't know that the Missouri Quilt Museum has the largest collection of miniature quilts anywhere.
Some of these pieces are 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch is a piece in a quilt block. Holy cow.
These amazing little quilts were made by Pat Coons, and there are over 50 of these miniature quilts, including the dolls, and there are even some where there's a full-size quilt and a miniature quilt to match. Can you spot it?
I am a huge fan of history. That was one of the reasons why this is my favorite museum, is because of all the history that's included in it. When I walked downstairs after going through the collection that was on loan from the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, there was another room that was the World War II history room. There were quilts on the wall, and there's different memorabilia in that room, all dating around that same time frame of World War II in the 1940s, all of that. But when you walk in the door, I was quite literally struck in awe. The visual effect of what you see on the wall in front of you makes you stop. And I mean, even sitting here right now talking about it, it drums up emotions. Right next to each other on the wall are 2 quilts. One of them is the swastika, the original swastika. And the second one is the Star of David. As you walk through the room and you come up to these quilts, there are 2 information sheets, one on each side, that talk about the quilts and the history of the quilts. But what I really appreciate is the information about the swastika. I'll read a little bit from the swastika quilt information that's on the wall. The swastika can be traced back to the early Neolithic age, approximately 12,000 years ago. Cave drawings of swastikas have been found during this age. The swastika first appears in writing in ancient Sanskrit around 350 BC. To many Native American tribes, the swastika, often called the windflower or the windmill, was a symbol of goodwill and peace. The Nazi movement in Germany took the swastika and rotated it 45 degrees into a symbol that we recognize today. The Nazi swastikas has an X at its center, while the Native American windflower has a plus sign or a cross at its core. In the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, the swastika became a popular quilt design. At the onset of World War II, sadly, many swastika quilts were unknowingly destroyed as a worldwide protest against Nazism. Only a few swastika or windflower quilts remain in existence. It really makes you think about, as you're standing there and taking in these quilts that are in front of you and the historical significance of them and the emotional power that they convey, especially the 2 of them together. I think that's what's the most significant to me, is that they are together. It made me wonder how many other things that we know today, whether they be words or symbols or phrases, how many things do we know today are completely different than what was their origin? are a travel, quilting, and history lover, you definitely want to add the Missouri Quilt Museum to your bucket list.